Just like that, we are at the final day of siberXchange 3.0, the Challenge Statement Edition. Welcome to day 5, and a good morning, a good afternoon, and good evening from wherever in the world that you are joining us today. My name is Ali Hirji, and you know me as the show host for the opening talk show, the host for the Power Hour, as well as a faculty member and lead of the Center for Cybersecurity Innovation and the AI Hub at Durham College. They say time and tide wait for none, and this is one great example of it. It feels like just a blink ago I was kicking off the conference alongside Chair Daniel Pinsky and my co-chairs Karen Nemani and Helen Oakley. And here we have it. We are at day number 5. So thank you all for supporting this session. A special thank you to sponsors like SentinelOne who have made all of this happen, as well as the advisory board members made up of cybersecurity experts across North America and the world. A big up to the team at siberX for making these exciting 5 days happen. And of course, the audience. All of you have been phenomenal in your participation. I do encourage you to consider participating today as well. Continue with your engagements. Visit the vault if you're looking for some merchandise. And more importantly, keep your connections and collaborations going. As over the next week, infographics from all of the sessions on demand will also be available, as well as links to new shows and upcoming programs. So thank you all for building a cybersecurity community on the siberXchange platform. All of us are joining in from various parts of the world, but this conference specifically is being beamed virtually from Canada, from the beautiful town of Ajax. And I want to acknowledge the indigenous lands that all of us are joining in from, and more importantly, pay recognition to the fact that even the virtual space across which we are delivering this conference, even that space constitutes indigenous space. Thank you all for your support, and I want to make sure that we hold true to some of the commitments that we have when it comes to our indigenous community. Indigenous communities always mention, and I clearly remember an elder once telling me, "Traveler, there are no paths. Paths are created by working." I hope that we will continue working together to ensure that our remote, rural, and indigenous communities continue to gain access to better education, quality services, and quality opportunities to participate and engage and allow us to continue learning from them. Today's day is on education, and it's quite fitting that it's happening on July 16th. July 16th, for some of you that may not remember, is the day that in the Watergate scandal was revealed that files were available and details were available proving some sort of political malfeasance. Bring that up because it's a good example to tell you about the various types of threats and vulnerabilities that can exist within an institution. And when we talk about education and academia, perimeter has shifted, the vulnerabilities have shifted, threat vectors and motivations have also shifted. 1973 to now, a lot has happened, and over the last 2 years, we've seen decades of innovation happen. How has the pandemic impacted the academic sector? What are some of the threats? What could we be doing from an awareness perspective? And also, how are different departments getting involved in the overall security conversation in academia, from K-12, universities, colleges, and beyond? So welcome to day 5, and welcome as we unpack cybersecurity in the educational. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. I'm going to have each one of them introduce themselves by asking one specific quick question. I'm going to start off with Luke, someone who's been a mentor to me. Luke, joining us from Canada's most resourceful city, Sudbury. Welcome to siberXchange. Can you tell us why is this conference important to you, and why is this subject about vulnerabilities in the education sector particularly important? Luke?
Ali, so wonderful to be here. Thank you so much. Interesting enough, as a role, I'm the Chief Information Officer at Laurentian University, and I can tell you that I'm not getting paid, or my primary focus is not cybersecurity. The reality, though, is that it is a primary concern, only because we have to save our intellectual property, make sure that people have some security, digital dexterity, and so on. And that's why this conference is so important to anyone. It doesn't matter where you are fit in the organization. It's extremely important. So thanks, Ali, to be here.
Absolutely. I think, you mentioned this at CISO Forum 2019, is you and I in cybersecurity, there's us, and the challenges of getting other stakeholders involved in the conversation, and applying resources to this can be particularly challenging. I do commend you for all of your efforts in bringing the broader cybersecurity community together from an education perspective. For those of you who are not aware, Luke, during my time at Iran, was actually the architect of what has now become the OnCheck program, and it's become a program where all the universities and colleges, in Ontario at least, are collaborating from threat intelligence feeds, resources, and to services. Luke, you were the architect of that and continue. Thank you so much for everything that you do. From Sudbury, I will board Luke's private jet and head off to Quebec to meet with my dear friend Matthew. Matthew, you are a superstar on the siberXchange platform. The crowd is going wild, cheering your name and saying SentinelOne. Introduce yourself and tell me what brings you here on, at least here, what seems to be a pretty sunny Friday.
I don't know if I hear the crowd there, Ali, but thanks a lot for the introduction. Yeah, so my name is Matt Balcer. I'm from SentinelOne, and we're a proud partner of siberX, and happy to have the audience here with us today. One of the things you said off the top, and I heard the word perimeter, and immediately in my head, Ali, I popped, what perimeter? I think that's the challenge we've seen over the last 12 to 18 to 24 months. Certainly in education, I mean, I saw a perimeter of my daughter's school go from a school where they had a lot of control to her bedroom upstairs over Zoom, over whatever tools were available to them, and the challenges facing a teacher that's not trained to adapt, and tools that weren't built to adapt to that sort of environment. And the CISO overnight became an 11-year-old sitting in her bedroom. So I don't know how, certainly the challenges we've seen in education over the last year through this pandemic have been unique across any industry. And, so I'm happy to share today, happy to see the sessions coming up, and happy to see that, education for one is ready and willing to take the challenge head on.
Absolutely. And you know what, with SentinelOne, one of the things that you've amplified is that security settings are never set in stone, set in Jello. And the flexibility that SentinelOne has shown, and particularly with the Singularity platform, I think even in your session with Hugh Burley and Sajeev Kumar, I think in your challenge statement, that is going to come up quite a bit. So once again, thank you, SentinelOne, for everything that you've been doing, supporting not just this conference, but also providing a lot of useful resources. To our audience, I will say this, and I'll look at the siberX team to perhaps post that link on the chat later on in the day. There's a very interesting white paper on the SentinelOne around the shifts in education and cybersecurity, and how the Singularity platform fits within that in all of its iterations. I do recommend you check that out. Matthew, as always, jokes aside, it's always a pleasure to chat with you, simply because of how personable you are and how knowledgeable you are as well. Matthew, I know that a lot of parties happen in Quebec, but nothing can beat New York City. I'm going to jump off and head off to the concrete jungle and welcome Sivan. Sivan, your second opening talk show with us. Welcome, Sivan. Why is this topic around cybersecurity in the education sector and cybersecurity education in general? Why is it so important to you? Sivan?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm always happy to join any session of you at siberX. Cyber education. I think, we've seen so many new technologies recently, and more companies that using new cybersecurity solutions. But at the end of the day, it's about the human factor. And there is no other way to increase awareness other than just train employees and get people to understand the reality we're living in. We're talking about digital transformation. Matthew gave an example from his daughter's school, and I had the same situation here. And I think that if in the past cybersecurity risks or cybersecurity concerns were only a problem of big organizations and companies, now any individual should understand the world we're living in, and there is no other way to kind of make people understand other than basically build more security campaigns, cybersecurity training and awareness plan, and also attract talents to join the industry by providing cyber education program and train people to become cybersecurity experts. I feel that's a mission of mine, and that's why it was so important for me to join this session and to provide some of my insights as part of it.
Absolutely, and I commend you as well for all the work that you do, especially with leading cyber ladies. I know as an expert, one of the things that you've constantly said is that yes, I'm an expert, but experts simply are the people who know what they do not know, and you keep surrounding yourself with the right people. Huge motivation, despite how busy you are, constantly making sure you are at these conferences, engaging in professional. The power of showing up is well embodied by you, Sivan. So thank you for everything that you do. Now, it's too early to get the party started in New York, so I'm going to actually head up to Alberta, considered to be, if I'm not mistaken, Canada's energy province. And if there's one person with a lot of energy, it is Sherifat, 1-year-old-ish in Canada, someone who's already established a name in the cybersecurity community here. Sherifat, welcome to the opening talk show. And from your perspective, why is cybersecurity education particularly important? Sherifat?
Thank you very much, Ali. It's my pleasure to be here and, and particularly participating in this topic. Cybersecurity is very important in the education sector because really the threat actors, they seem to see education sector as a very soft target. And apart from it being the soft target, it also houses a lot of information. So like Luke mentioned earlier, intellectual properties, things that the academia have really worked on, research papers that threat actors could easily get, to. The fact that most schools will have to embrace BYOD gives room to a lot of assets, uncontrolled assets that they can manage. Students, and someone said the other day, if you want to find out about something, ask a teenager. So they're always very curious. So, with a lot of vulnerabilities existing in the education sector, a lot of threat actors believe, is a good place to go poke around and to make sure, which is why cybersecurity is very, very important. Talk about safety. So imagine a vulnerability in a camera in the class or something, and then students, they are being viewed live on the internet. Imagine the impact of that on privacy of the students. So it is very important. And, when looking at all the topics, I thought this is a topic I would really like to discuss and be part of. Thank you.
Absolutely. And, I'll add to that is in your own work with the Farmers Co-op in Alberta, leading some cybersecurity initiatives with them, the different sectors now that we're seeing impacted by automation and the threats that come. I think, there's a lot to offer there. And for the siberX team that's watching, agriculture and AI, cybersecurity is another very important area where disruptions to the food chain and the supply chain from a food perspective can all cause a lot of damage. So, Sherifat, thank you for all of the perspective that you bring, new areas of research, new areas of conversations that you open up. Sherifat, as always, it's a pleasure. And those of you who don't know, Omer Ahmed is our final guest, someone who prefers to be behind the scenes. That's where he gets all of the power work done. Based out of BC, the province which you can access by land, by sea, and by air. So depending on whichever mode of transportation I use, please join me in welcoming Omer. Omer, I know that you are relatively at a distance from the hardcore cybersecurity practices, but tell us a little bit about what you do at UBC. And how have you started developing an interest in?
Thank you for having me today, Ali. Really an honor. You're right. I'm not a tech guru from any angle. I mean, I could hardly get my Zoom to work today. So, bear with me. But I can tell you that cybersecurity is one of my top risks for the university that I lose sleep over night after night. This calls for lots of discussions and fruitful discussions and meetings with our CIO and other and CISOs and other IT professionals. I feel there's much to learn from one another, and conferences such as these, I feel, is the right platform for such a thing. So I will say that the heavy reliance on, especially in the last year, in the current climate that we're in, the pandemic climate, there's been heavy reliance on technology in teaching modalities and pedagogies, which can, of course, as we know, can expose us to cyber threats. And I felt, that has brought me closer to the world of cybersecurity. And I thought this was really befitting of me to be here today and to learn from everyone.
Absolutely.
So thank you for having me again.
Absolutely, and in your work in protecting the institution risk, things from an audit perspective, keep it down. I think there's a lot that you bring to the table, and I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more from you. You know, Sherifat mentioned, you know, BYOD, bring your own device. People are bringing their own disruption now. People are bringing new opportunities with it, new vulnerabilities, new practices, and threats. So speaking of an ever-changing landscape, a landscape that is not set in stone but set in jello, I'm going to ask Luke to shed a little bit of light on why is a university environment, or why academic so particularly interesting to bad actors? What kind of data resides within the university ecosystem that could be of particular? Luke?
Yes, the university environment is really a pool of intellectual property when you think about it, especially when you do research. You know, Sherifat mentioned that. So what you find is, I'll give you some perspectives. So Laurentian University, not the biggest university in Canada, but we actually are in 3 areas that is mostly sought by state actors and things like that. We're big in mining, we're big in scientific medical research. And so, I'll say 2 out of the 3 because technology is the other one. But those are areas that are people or state actors are always looking for information. So the discussion I'm having with my VP research is, of course, you know, safe passage of data, safe storage of data, but how do you actually validate the people you're doing research with? This blows my mind. It's how do you verify that? And you know, one other perspective, and I'll leave it to that, is that anything that's related, research related to, let's say, military is one thing, and research that's related to what I would call pedestrian or social or civilian applications, that's another thing. But they have dual purposes. They can be used to actually, you know, against us in you know, civilian applications can be used as a military and vice versa. And it's extremely important that if you're going to do research, validate not only the people, but what's the risks and how could it be threatened or the risk of losing the data so you can actually do your safeguards even better. And I would say the government of Canada has been assisting us with some guidelines and frameworks, you know, thankfully. And but how do you defend against that? So it's all that intellectual property in all of these areas, and it doesn't matter. You know, you have to protect it.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, this has raised a lot of interesting conversations in the academic sector, even not just from a software and a networking perspective, even from a hardware perspective. What equipment are we deploying? Who the vendors are, and it's brought a lot of our practices into question, but it got us to be a lot more cognizant. I'd also add, and this is probably something I'll bring up with Omer, is, you know, Luke, you mentioned engaging with the VP of Research. We find ourselves now engaging with the procurement teams, CAOs as well, talking about some of the practices. So it really has, if anything, the education sector has reminded us about how interdisciplinary cybersecurity is. And of course, I do also want to touch on, you know, the bilingual element of it and what that brings in to the education sector. But as always, Luke, thank you for bringing some very important perspective. Matthew, let's bring you back into the conversation, and we'll keep the same flow. Matthew, you know, when you look at the SentinelOne stack, especially the Singularity platform, you've got something for everybody. But as I mentioned earlier, you know, the perimeter is dead. When you look to deploy now, in some cases, SentinelOne is deployed on certain machines, like Lenovo, if I'm not mistaken. Very well done there. You get the machine, you've got some deployment there, you've got some detection happening there, detection. But all of a sudden, mid-March, everything moves remote. The perimeter shifts dramatically. In those kind of situations, how agile and nimble has the Singularity platform been?
I mean, we've been lucky enough that, you know, the platform was built for flexibility prior to any of this, you know, going down, because Luke spoke to the value of the assets in education. And one of the things is people had to pick budgets in March too, right? Because you had to decide, am I getting X number of employees, X number of students, making them able to be mobile? And so they had to focus on taking something that wasn't very flexible, which was people sitting in desks in front of a teacher, and find a way to transfer that. So we got lucky enough that our platform, it doesn't matter where, when the asset is, it is protected by the SentinelOne agent. Now, Luke also spoke to the governments stepping in and helping. One of the things we saw here in the province I live in Quebec, is the government actually put out what they called 15 security measures. And some would say it was right on time. Some would say it was maybe even a little bit behind, but I think some of the other provinces are still trying to catch up. And it's all due to making sure now you're making decisions and spending budget where you can already be flexible. And that's something we've prided ourselves on with our platform, EDR, protecting those critical endpoint assets, with something that's flexible, because we know, if I compare a customer I just worked with in education, 6,000 assets. I have some idea of what their security budget is. I have a mirrored customer outside the education industry that also has 6,000 assets. If I take that corporate customer's IT budget and divide it by 10, I now have the education customer's budget. So we're playing a very difficult game. And I think that's one of the things we've focused on with SentinelOne, is a platform that's easy to use, a platform that's adaptable, and a platform that is affordable and usable by just about any vertical on the planet. So education has been a big focus for us over the last little while, for sure.
Somebody give this man a cookie, because that point that you mentioned about finances, I know it all too well, right? Now, of course, even though I may not necessarily sit on the infrastructure side, but just leading the research side, it is the reality of it, right? And I often, when I'm working with certain vendors who I look at as partners, including SentinelOne, if the opportunity emerges for us to work, the writing joke for us is, we'll pay you with peanuts or peas and nuts, whatever you want. So it's one of those situations that it is a reality that sometimes budget can creep in. And I do want to bring that up a little bit later on, because for our audience and those who are evaluating a SentinelOne solution, I will say this, and this is speaking from industry experience and consultations, it is shaped and sized for a variety of enterprise. So even small to medium enterprise have the capacity to use something like SentinelOne. And the visibility in the dashboards, even folks who may not necessarily understand what a taxi log is or a Stix log is or whatever have you, or a sys log, even folks with other areas of expertise like Omer Ahmed can gain expertise and can gain insight from the SentinelOne dashboards. And so definitely something that I want to bring up. Sivan, I want to loop you back into the conversation, because you've had a very, as I said earlier on, a very surgically precise approach to how do you do training, how do you do education, and you're constantly consulting. Do you do any work with parents, for example? Like, I remember watching this video. I don't remember when, and my mind usually is not something to go by, but I think this was about a couple of weeks ago, where they were interviewing these kids and their parents. And do you think your school is secure? And one of the kids said, yeah, I think so, because I think my principal checks the computer every night and it's safe. Do you engage with parents at all? Do you engage with them on what they need to be doing to stay cyber safe, Sivan? Sivan was on mute. Here we go. Unmuted.
So I didn't know if I mentioned that, but I am working with a high school here in New York City. I developed a cybersecurity program for high school students. And I thought it's interesting. I mean, the students are super excited about this program. And what I heard from their parents is that they basically trying to educate their parents after, they're sitting in class, they're experiencing, I'm trying to expose them to different solutions, but also, show them the reality. I don't know if everyone are using a light beam, for example, in their day-to-day life, but with Shodan, Lightbeam, tools like that, where basically students can see all the open ports and all the risks, and they can sometimes even test their own home network. So I think by only exposing the students, and especially when they're young to those kind of risks. It's basically help the parents to be more aware of the different concerns. And there is also, the other aspect of, I mean, I did few sessions during the year with parents specifically to kind of show them how social media works, how everyone collects information, and how basically we all have our digital identity out there, and we need to manage this digital identity. And I think it wasn't shocking for parents, but as when you are able to explain that in a way and to show that in a way that they understand that it's not only a risk, but there are also many things that you can do to manage your identity, your digital identity, to kind of monitor your uh, kids' activity. That's super important for them, and I think that most of the parents today are able to pick it up. But I feel that we do need to focus more on an early age students, because they are more tech savvy basically, and they can understand the different solutions and concerns. And sometimes I just feel like they're more curious. They want to learn. They want to know better. And since we anyway have a shortage in the industry, I think that's also the best way to attract those young adults or young students to choose eventually in the cybersecurity space as a profession, and potentially become the next generation of cybersecurity experts.
Very well said. And I really like that emphasis that you brought about social media, especially as more kids, especially in the K to 12, are engaging across social media and digital platforms to empower their learning. It's really important that revelations are made, and parents understand what's happening in these spaces and how you can engage proactively and safely online. You know what they say, right? What happens in Vegas lands up on YouTube. So making sure that kids know where their data is going, and keeping them empowered in that regard. So thank you for everything that you do there. And I will add this, Sivan. I think one of the things which I give you a lot of credit for, and a couple of other members on our board, Danny Pahar as an example, KC from the CIO from the region of Durham, they try and make these outreach sessions to parents and kids more relatable, using comics, for example, or in some cases with esports, cyber, playing digital tabletop games. All of these are different ways to help that conversation happen and speak to people at a different level. And I thank you, Sivan, for everything that you do. Sherifat, I want to bring you back into the conversation. Over the last year, you've been in Canada, entering into Canada during the core of the pandemic, and finding work and then starting to engage. Have you started to see that people who previously didn't have conversations about cybersecurity are coming and asking you questions? Are people shocked? Are they surprised? How are you dealing with some of the new notions that communities have been introduced to when it comes to security? Sherifat?
Yes, absolutely. So since the start of the pandemic, we had to move to digital. Our lives practically changed. We saw that shift happen right before our eyes, and everybody had to do what they needed to do quickly to get on it and to make sure they're doing it securely. So, every now and then I get a lot of questions relating to cybersecurity. The other day I had to do a YouTube video with a friend, and she is into talking about digital things. And she said she was getting a lot of questions on cybersecurity, and she didn't know the answer. So she reached out to me to come online to, do 1 hour session to educate small businesses on cybersecurity, what they can do to make sure they are not losing their revenue. Because to a small business, a single cyber attack could be the end of their business. And also for schools, this is also very important. We get a lot of my friends back home, even from Nigeria, their parents reaching out to say, well, yes, I saw your post about this. I made a post the other day. I had this parental app for my son on his laptop. And after about 2 days, when the parental app was really frustrating me, the next thing I saw on the logs that I was Googling was trying to remove the app from his laptop. He wasn't successful in doing that anyways. But I get these questions from friends, from people trying to know, okay, what do I need to do to make sure they're safe online? So a lot of people are curious about this, because even though we're beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel, for the pandemic is coming to a head, I don't think we are going to go back fully without using digital. The digital has come to stay. It's going to be in our lives for a very long time. And so a lot more people are getting interested. They're trying to ask more questions. What can we do to make sure we're safe? What can we do to keep our intellectual property safe online, our kids safe online? What they do, who do they interact with? Because cybersecurity has gone beyond just keeping your information secure. We heard yesterday from the healthcare sector how important it is in the healthcare sector. It's also very important in how we form our lives, how our children grow. What do they see online? Who do they even interact with? Are they talking to someone online who is pretending to be a child and meanwhile is an adult? What kind of information are they putting online that may affect them in the future? Some people tweet things now, and that could be the tweets that will stop you from maybe a future job. So all these tips and information and awareness about being online securely is quite important. And I've been getting loads of that from formal sector to informal sector, from friends asking basic questions to people actually engaging me and wanting me to talk about it. So yes, we'll continue to see that.
Absolutely. And Sherifat, very quickly, I will commend you for constantly going back to your experiences in Africa and still maintaining that connection. I think that ability to take what you're doing in Canada and also translating it and bringing learnings from Africa, from Nigeria, here is an extremely important practice and ties back to what I mentioned earlier on about the learnings, especially our engagements with the indigenous communities. I commend you for that. And I said this at Women in Cyber, rather at Beyond Borders, where you joined at 3 a.m. EST. Well, so was I, since I was moderating that session. And I said something which I hold true to my heart, is that God may visit all places of the earth, but chooses to reside in Africa. That spirit that you show is truly well appreciated. So thank you, Sherifat, for that perspective. Omar, very quickly to you back in BC. Omar, you've started the conversations, looking at things from a risk perspective, a compliance perspective. You started to have conversations from a security standpoint with other members of your team, and you're asking to learn more. Have you found the resources to be enough? Are there some challenges with the resources to learn more about cybersecurity? How are you navigating this really complex mesh?
Yeah, well, we do live in the world of, or this era of information. So there is information overload. There's ample of stuff that you can find online, but you really have to sift through the valuable stuff. Meeting with risk professionals from other industries is also very helpful, and really engaging with thought leaders in this arena has been very beneficial for me. So I've been a risk professional in the higher ed sector for about 10 years now, and I think it must have been like early on. I think it must have been like about 8 or 9 years ago when I first heard about cybersecurity, and it was in one of the risk magazines that I was reading. And I quickly went online and did some research and went to my CIO and I said, "Hey, do you think we should put cybersecurity on our risk register?" And he was like, "Yes, of course. We've been doing this penetration test and firewalls and this and that," and all these jargons were going over my head. And I took the liberty to really start going through my network and attending conferences and learning from consultants and others to really equip myself to understand what is this world of cybersecurity. I thought it was all about tech support. Like for me, technology was that's what it was. But I've come a long way, I feel, but I feel also at the same time there's a long road ahead of me. Also, I mean, as we know, cyber attacks or threats develop on a daily basis, right? And just when you think you're on top of your game, there's something new around the corner that you gotta spend dollars on and learn more about and equip yourself. So it's a constant battle, and while you lose sleep over it, it does keep you on your toes, and complexities is what keeps me going. So I enjoy it.
No, and I agree that there are no finish lines when it comes to security, only milestones and flags, and we just keep on moving and keep on going. We've got another 18 minutes left, so let's keep on moving and keep on going. Thank you, Omer, as always. Matthew, question that has been direct messaged into me, and I saw this one coming. I know that the challenge statement is where you're supposed to be on the hot seat, but it wouldn't be a session with me if I didn't turn things upside down. Matthew, this is a question on social engineering. How does that factor into the Singularity platform? Matthew.
So, I mean, human beings are the biggest variable out there, right? Most computers are built very similarly. Most servers are built very similarly. So the biggest vulnerability and the biggest wildcard out there is absolutely human beings. So as hackers try and take their shot, the one thing they can rely on almost time and time again is the fact that there will be some cracks, some way in through human interaction. And so what we try and do with the SentinelOne solution is remove that variable from importance. Meaning, at the end of the day, what the hacker will try and do is get to the system. They might use social engineering. They might, play on that human flaw. But at the end of the day, they're going to try and get to the systems. That's where the data resides that Luke, describes as being so valuable. That's the risk that Omer is fighting against. This is why we're trying to educate people, like Sivan said. And this is why, the culture has to change, like Sherry was pointing out too. But at the end of the day, the end goal of every hacker is to get to that system, compromise it in some way, and get your data. So this is where SentinelOne focuses. We can't control the human behavior, but I know what system behavior looks like. So I take that knowledge and we apply it to algorithms and technology. And then it doesn't matter if the human makes a mistake, because they're going to. We're going to guard down the system and look for the system's behavior to change. And if it changes in such a way that it's indicating some sort of threat or some sort of malicious activity, that's when SentinelOne will jump into action. And the second piece to that is, okay, human flaw, social engineering. Well, we talked about perhaps a skills void. I would go even further and say, we've gone beyond the skills void. We are in a skills crisis right now in terms of cybersecurity. And so one of the other prides that we have in our solution is that it will do a lot of the work for you. That big R at the end of EDR, this acronym that everybody's talking about, is response. And that is where SentinelOne shines above all the other solutions on the planet, is that we've built in the response to take care of you when you do make that mistake, when you do get socially engineered by doing what you would normally do anyways. The solution fills the gap for you and sort of makes your mistakes less risky.
I appreciate that response. And, one of the things that I often talk about is, when you're evaluating a solution, often we make this mistake, and being in the applied research space, we often build solutions and then go looking for the problems. I think in your case with SentinelOne, and if you want to put this on the t-shirt, you've understood the problems first and then build a solution. And with the research work that you do as well, understanding more and more of the problems and the feeds that you get to understand these problems really get manifested in the solution pretty well. So I'm looking forward to seeing how you engage in that conversation also with Hugh and Sajeev. Sajeev, while also being the CISO, rather the lead for security for OnTechU, also is the lead for security for us at Durham College and works very closely with our innovation lab as well. So I'm sure I'll be tuning in as an audience member for a change, but I'm looking forward to learning more there. Captain Luke, I have to put you now on the hot seat just because on my show here I can see you after Matthew, and I think it's important to put you in a challenging situation now. This is an interesting question, and this has to do with what Matthew just mentioned about automation and AI and the skills crisis. How easy is it within a SOC environment, a security environment like a university environment which is unionized, to bring in tools that automate a lot of functions? many of these, some have the human in the loop, some don't. Is it particularly challenging to bring such tools into cybersecurity ecosystems? Because for one, jobs could be under threat, and for two, where does the liability, so on and so forth, sit? Luke, your perspective.
Absolutely. It's actually, thanks for putting me on the spot. It's actually a big question. And I'll take the example that we are facing. In IT, you practically almost have to reinvent yourself almost every year. When I say reinvent, it's to revamp your environment, see what you need. And, you know, applications keep growing exponentially. When I was younger, we used to say, oh my God, there's lots of application. Now there's even more. It's not going to stop. And I find that there's a real risk, and I appreciate Sivan's comment about, you know, we need to educate and add this digital dexterity on our young minds and grow them. And people are not quick to change, right? Culture is like, I'd like to replicate. I may be in a union capacity where I'm happy with what I do and I don't want to change. So you really need to evaluate your people, and not just your tools, but your people on a yearly basis. It's, and I'm not speaking just with IT, I'm speaking with all of business units that are critical, and all business units in education are critical, even including our faculty members and researchers, that you have to reevaluate. So how do you do this? It's very difficult. How many of you have actually seen an education or university or college? How much did it change 10 years ago to what it is today? Well, maybe what it is today is a little bit different, but not, you know, let's say last year. Not much, but yet our environment, our reality is changing. So how do you do this? So I don't really have a good answer other than reevaluate your organization across the board for digital dexterity, business, but all acumen and digital acumen, but also, of course, security acumen. And then the tools will come along with it in terms of reevaluating. And Matthew, I agree with you. Endpoint security is actually such a beautiful thing. But sometimes, you know, it's difficult with budgets that we've got. And you were so right by saying 1/10. I think some of us is even 1/20th. But anyway, that's the point. So Ali, I kind of danced around, but I'm hoping I've given some guidance.
You danced around, but I'm still waiting to see the Bollywood dance, which you've promised us for a while ago. So you know what? It's good. No, but I do get your point, and very well structured as always. You know, speaking as a CIO, you provide a lot of context, and that rich context is extremely important. However, I will say this. You mentioned something where you said, when I was younger. Luke, when I asked you a couple of days ago, did you take your vaccine? You said nope, because they haven't yet opened it up for under 18s. So I'm a little confused here, Luke. We got to clarify this. But anyways, Luke, thank you so much. We've got a couple of more minutes, just about 6 to 7 minutes. So I'm going to race through one question and then we'll go from there. Sivan, real quick, if you heard, you know, I'm sure you've also seen the SentinelOne stack, and, you know, proof is in the pudding. The initial public offering when they went public is a very good example of how successful SentinelOne is getting and how much uptake there is. In fact, I will say this, when the opportunities to join SentinelOne in the challenge statements were put out, they were picked up very, very quickly. And that's because there is interest in this tool. But when you listen to Luke as well, Sivan, cybersecurity now also involves AI skills, data skills, blockchain skills, so on and so forth. Is that making the skills deficit that much more increased? Is that making it more challenging for more people to come out as sound professionals in cybersecurity? Sivan, your perspective.
I actually think that it makes cybersecurity experts' life much easier, because using tools like, you know, user-friendly tools like SentinelOne and other products in the market, basically, you know, it means that even if you don't have deep technical skills, you can still manage the platform, and you can still, for example, you know, implement solutions remotely. And all those platforms are usually, you know, cloud-based platforms now. We see more, I mean, the UX UI design is much better. The AI capabilities helps us get more control and visibility over the network, which is key. So as long as you use those tools in a way that helps you to kind of get a better understanding of your environment, it's much easier for you to respond, even if you're not automatically respond, but it's still, I think that's basically support the support the industry, and that might be even easier to attract more people, because, you know, if in the past you had to, I mean, I remember myself at the beginning of my career configuring firewalls, that was a nightmare. Now when you can basically use tools, cloud-based tools, and manage policies for your network layer or application layer remotely through the cloud, it's just, it saves a lot of time, and it's cheaper now, basically, because when you save time, you basically need less people to kind of figure out all those different policies. So I think that makes our life much easier. I think that, you know, how I see it now when we work remotely, and we're probably going to stay with this kind of model or a hybrid model of working remotely, I think each one of us, even if we're not cybersecurity expert, we are the CISO of our own home network, home environment. And even if we're not very tech savvy, we need to have a basic understanding and also the ability to use the different tools out there. Of course, there are many other challenges like shadow IT, people using their own tools. I'm not going to get into it because I know we don't have a lot of time, but I feel that AI-based technologies and other technologies that we have today, it just makes our life much easier. And I can't wait to see where we're going to get in like 10 years from now.
Absolutely, you know, very well put. And I like that statement, you know, we are the CISOs of our own homes. Although I wish I could say that in my home, you know, the wife is the CEO, the CISO, the CTO, and the CFO. I'm employed there. I don't even know when payday is. That's how bad it is.
Just don't get fired, Ali. Just don't get fired.
All right. Thanks, Matthew. Thanks for the wonderful words of wisdom. Sivan, as always, very well said. Sherifat, very quickly on your end. This is a question that has come in, but I think you can provide some perspective on this, is when you think about insider threats and motivations. I know you've worked in different environments, you know, education sector as well. You're well familiar with research practices, etc. What do you think motivates an insider threat to happen? Like when you explain how you can protect against insider threats, can you speak a little bit about what drives what drives someone to actually go down becoming an insider threat? Sherifat?
Yeah, thank you. And I think Luke mentioned it when, you know, or was it Omar? Sorry, when you're talking about, you know, what kind of people are we even getting on the job? So I think I don't think any employee will just suddenly, it happens, right? But it's very rare for an employee to just suddenly become a threat for the company he or she works for. So it stems from background, and a lot of the information security management frameworks, such as ISO 27001 and the likes, they recommend background checking for key employees. So employees that do certain critical functions, you need to know their background. So an employee who's been working for an organization 5, 6, 10 years will certainly not become a rogue. So usually it's from when you bring them on board that you need to know, you know, what is their interest? What are they actually in the company for? Are they here because they are planted there for whatever reason? Or are they here to be a threat to try to steal intellectual properties of the organization to sell to competitors? Are they there to just be, you know, a logic bomb waiting to explode one day? But for an employee that has been working, some of the things that may actually lead to an employee becoming a threat within the company has a lot to do about how the employee has been treated, you know, the culture in the organization. Has that employee been happy if I believe if an employee is fairly treated, things, they are meeting, even if they are not meeting their performance obligations, there's a way to manage it. That employee is treated as a human being fairly, and I don't think they will suddenly become a threat. So by and large, what I'm trying to say is that a lot has to do with the onboarding right from the very beginning. Who are you bringing on board to your organization? And usually within the first 2 years, anyone who is there for a malicious reason will eventually go out if they are unable to do anything. Yeah.
Absolutely, and Sherifat, very well put together. We've been hearing this trend across the conference is to trust but verify. And keeping that verification process constant is extremely important. And in future conferences, definitely this should be a subject of more discussion. Sherifat, as always, thank you for giving us more nuggets of thought that are really, really important for us. Now, we have about 5 minutes left. And I want to come to the closing question and just provide some lighthearted commentary so that we can then give Matthew the time that he needs to prepare for his 1 o'clock challenge statement. Omer, we'll start the close with you. Omer, I know you were a little bit on the defensive about joining the session. This is your first time discussing security publicly, but you've provided perspective around risk and compliance and how you're beginning to engage, and you've helped break silos and showing the actions that you're taking. From your perspective, was this a beneficial engagement for you? And also, with lots of things opening up in Canada, do you have any plans for the lovely weekend after siberXchange 3.0? Omer.
Well, let me say number one, yes. I think I was just a little overwhelmed with all the professionals on this panel, and I thought I won't be able to really add value given the beautiful experience that everyone here brings. But yes, I've learned a lot. It's always nice to be with like-minded individuals who are faced with similar challenges, and one can really, take away lessons from that. I think we've all learned a lot of lessons from the pandemic, and there's more to be learned. And I feel like discourses such as these really does help, better your postures at work. In terms of the weekend, yes, I'm really looking forward to the weekend. I think the dry spell has broken. It's raining here in Vancouver. I think it was long overdue. I think we all missed the rain. It's been a few weeks since we got the rain, and I think it'll probably be better for the ones on the west side, because there's a lot of forest fires going on, and I think really God has showered us, literally.
Absolutely.
So thank you for having me again.
No worries, and thank you for reminding us that COVID-19 has taught us that we all have needs. And the reason I ask these questions is that I do want our audience to understand that there are people behind your security, behind your risk assessment, so on and so forth, and they all take ways to take care of their mental health. And yesterday in the healthcare session, we learned a lot about the pressures facing CISO, the pressures facing partners like SentinelOne to constantly deliver and be on top of things. Sometimes it's extremely important to remember that at the end of the day, we all have needs and we all need a space to decompress. So hopefully, Omar, once things open up some more, hope to see you in BC to enjoy some of that lovely landscape and engage further in discussions with you. Very quickly, Captain Luke, I've been with you at CISO Forum 2019 and other in-person conferences. The party starts when Luke enters the building. Luke, how important, how enjoyable was this session for you? And let me assume for this weekend, you're going to spend it reading and learning more about SentinelOne, I assume?
Yes, actually, I just got a link request on LinkedIn from Chris. But anyway, little word of advice, because Ali sets me up real well, and he's, at the end of the day, in education sector, we don't have as much money as in the private sector, as Matthew alluded. And there are things you can do which doesn't cost too much money in SentinelOne. But anyway, you can reevaluate your team. You can make sure you've got your security framework, do things collaboratively with other schools, because that reduces the cost. There's a lot of things you can do. So thanks, Ali. Wonderful panel. I've learned, you all said something that I retained. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luke. And thank you for mentioning that Chris, during this session, responded and added you on LinkedIn, because I messaged him asking him for more swag, or maybe just that Aston Martin car on SentinelOne's ads, but he hasn't responded. So Matthew, please reach out to Chris. Sivan, real quick, how enjoyable has this conference been for you? And in terms of when you think about de-stressing and getting your mind away from the hustle and bustle of daily things. What do you do as a security professional, Sivan?
So yeah, this session was great. The whole conference. Thank you so much for that. I learned a lot anytime when I speak with other professionals. Um, you didn't ask me about my plans for the weekend, but every weekend I'm doing a SUP, pedal boarding on the Hudson. And I feel like that's my way to practice risk management and to kind of, there is basically when I'm out there in the water, I always have a strategy, but then there is traffic, waves. I always need to adjust. Sometimes I fall. Sometimes I need to, recover. So basically, what I'm doing is always to, I think sometimes we forget that we need to make sure that we balance things, and it's so easy to focus on our work all the time, and it's super important. But I think what makes us even better professionals is to allow ourselves to kind of have a downtime sometimes and be inspired. And I'm inspired by the water. That's what I'm doing, and that's what I feel makes me be a better professional. So I give you that advice for the weekend or in general. And thank you so much for having me.
Only Sivan could turn weekend plans into a philosophical discussion. So I will say this, that your weekend plans involve a lot of moving and exercise. Yeah, I'm allergic to that stuff. So for me, I'll just read books because books are a great way to move, to travel without moving. So, but anyway, Sivan, thank you for that. Real quick, Sherifat, hope you enjoyed the session. Your plans for the weekend?
Yeah, sure. I really enjoyed the session, Ali. I doubt without the education sector, none of us will be here. So, it's what brought us here. We all went to school. That is why we're able to do what we're doing today. So this topic was very, very important, and I was very interested in it, and I absolutely enjoyed it. For the weekend, it's very simple. I don't have much. I have kids, and they've been on holiday. So the weekend is usually for them. Even if they want to take a walk or ride a bicycle, I have to get on it with them and, spend some quality time with them, because from Monday to Friday, I'm working, I'm at home working, and, they can't understand, why can't we just do this thing? I'm working at home, even if I'm at home. So I try to dedicate the weekend to them. I follow their lead. Whatever they want to do, I try to do that for now. Thank you.
Kids, you can't return them to where you got them from, neither can you sell them for their parts, but we love them and you got to follow along with that. Sherifat, as always, thank you so much for all of your perspective and your kindness, and as Sivan mentioned, a superwoman juggling so many different items and making sure that you're able to give priority to family and engage with community is so important. Last but not the least, Matthew, assuming all goes well with the challenge statement that you have at 1 p.m., I'll be watching. What are your plans and how do you decompress?
Yeah, so Sivan said she's going to be paddling. I, like Sherry, will probably be pedaling this weekend, getting on the bikes with the kids. So really excited about that. I can actually see from the window right now that the sun is finally peeking through the clouds. So unlike Omer, who's been, in a dry spell, we've been in a bit of a wet spell here on the East Coast. So I'm happy that that's supposed to break on the weekend and we'll be able to get out there. So that's my plans for the weekend. Again, unless there's complete failure at 1 o'clock, in which case I'll probably be, rethinking my career.
Fair enough. And the team at SentinelOne never sleeps, so they'll still be checking their phones and checking their emails and making sure that all of their clients and the wider community remain safe. Speaking of weather, I will say this, that in Ontario, about probably less than 12 hours ago, out in Barrie, we had a serious tornado, and quite a few folks have suffered. Our friends at Georgian College, if I'm not mistaken, up there, our thoughts are with you. And of course, natural disasters can also result in a lot of digital infrastructure damage and security issues emerge. So please, I do know that on the SentinelOne platform, they do have emergency response environments as well. So if you want to engage with them and with the rest of the community, please do. With that said, I'm going to thank Omer, Sherifat, Matthew, Luke, and Sivan for everything that you've done today, for this engaging, lively discussion. I provided no context into this discussion besides an email saying, hey, join me and let's chat. And I appreciate that you took me up on that offer and enjoyed this experience. I'm going to ask all of you just to wait on I'll close the session. I'll ask you to stay on so that we can conclude backstage just for 30 seconds. But once again, thank you so much for everything that you've done. To our audience, coming up in the next hour and a half, I believe, is a very enjoyable session with Matthew again from SentinelOne, Sajeev, and Hugh Burley, leaders in the academic space, both in Ontario and BC. They have a lot of things to offer when it comes to understanding the academic perimeters and the endpoints. Highly recommend you join that, especially if you're trying to understand what does it mean as a researcher when I write or I access my data sitting at home, or when I download it to my machine and work from it at home. Lots of interesting questions are going to come up, and I know I'll definitely be tuned in. After that, Maddie Ruzza from siberX will be leading a very interesting discussion on vaccination data and what people need to be educated about when it comes to sharing that data. We'll then have a session and a fireside chat with Phelps Cybersecurity, and then come to the end of the conference. There's one thing that I've learned today, is that not only do you need to learn about security, we need to secure our learning. Thank you, Matthew, Sherifat, Luke, Omar, and Sivan, for all of your insight. On behalf of the siberXchange Advisory Board and to everybody else, thank you so much for joining. I'm signing out for the day. No more sessions for me. I look forward to being part of the audience. Take care, stay safe, stay healthy.